Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and still I rise, and still I rise. And I rise today, as always, when I address persons in this most sacred place in my heart. I rise as a proud American. I am proud to say that I'm an American. I'm proud to say that I'm American because my foreparents made it what it is. Its greatness can be traced back to 240 years of free labor, free sacrifice. And I'm proud. I wear the tie, indicating that I'm proud. I salute the flag. I say the Pledge of Allegiance. I sing the national anthem. I am proud to be an American, and why wouldn't I be proud, given that my foreparents made it great? The greatness of America resides today on the economic foundation laid by persons of African ancestry. They are the economic foundational mothers and fathers of this country. Now, there are some who say to me, literally, how can you be proud, Al Green, when your foreparents were put into chains, when they were beaten, when women were raped, when they were born into slavery, lived their lives as slaves? How can you be proud? I can be proud because I have the power to forgive. The power to forgive. The power to forgive for all of these transgressions. God has given me this power. I would hope that others could acquire the power to forgive. The power to forgive is the power that will allow you to go on and to do other things. God did not give me, however, the power to forget. Forgive and forget is not a sensible statement of where the heart and mind should be, in my opinion. It is forgive and remember. Forgive all of the transgressions, but remember that they occurred. This is why we can say never again as it relates to certain transgressions. So I forgive, and I love the country, but I don't forget. And today I want to talk about my foreparents. This is a depiction of when they may have arrived on August 20th of 1619. I want to talk about them, and I want to talk about the racism in America today. As we discuss racism in America today, we have to first identify the reasons why Africans were enslaved. Reasons why America enslaved Africans, to be more specific. Remember, I'm the guy who's forgiving. I'm the guy who loves the country, sings the national anthem, but he doesn't forget. Why did America enslave Africans? Here's why. To be a permanent, I think 240 years of enslavement is a pretty good representation of the fact that there was an intentionality that it be permanent. To be a permanent, identifiable, easily recognized among the population. Permanent 240 years of enslavement. Identifiable, the complexion of skin as the methodology by which one could be immediately identified and put in his proper place or her proper place, their proper place. Permanent, identifiable, powerless. There was never the desire to have persons of African ancestry become powerful in this country. It was not there. I'm talking about at the genesis of this, August 20th, 1619, when they were first introduced into the colonies. There was slavery in the country prior to this, but we're talking about when it was introduced into the colonies. Brought here to be a permanent, identifiable, powerless. No power, The courts in this country actually recognized the fact that we were powerless. In Dred Scott, when the Chief Justice indicated that persons of African ancestry had no rights that a white person had to respect. Not in those exact words, but that's the exact meaning. Had no rights. Permanent, identifiable, powerless. Subservient. They were brought here to be servants, but not just servants in the sense of people who were to do the bidding of others, but to do so with a degree and a demeanor of servility. They had to be servile. Servile. Brought here to be a permanent, identifiable, powerless, subservient. Caste. Caste, not class. There's a distinction. Class has to do with a socioeconomic identification. Caste has to do with a hereditary identification, meaning if you were born into this caste, this group, you were to be a slave. You were enslaved by birth. By definition, at birth, you were enslaved. Permanently enslaved. Identifiably enslaved. Powerless as a slave. Subservient as a slave. Forever a slave as long as you lived. Reasons why America enslaved Africans. To be a permanent, identifiable, powerless, subservient caste of people. To this day, much of this still exists. To this day, there are still people who treat persons of African ancestry as though they are still powerless and should be subservient, and they belong to this caste. When Dr. King went to India on his pilgrimage, he was introduced at a certain venue. And when he was introduced, it was said to him that he was a part of a caste. Initially, he didn't really, in my opinion, know exactly how to respond to this because he'd not been told that he was a part of a caste. But after giving some thought to it, he realized that to a certain extent there was this caste system. So to this day, there's still evidence of people who believe that we should be powerless. Let's examine that. We're obviously still identifiable. But still, we should be powerless. We still have problems accessing the capital that allows one to succeed in society. We have evidence, empirical evidence, evidencing the fact that persons of African ancestry who are eminently qualified can apply for a loan, and they will pay higher points for that loan. They will receive less sometimes than what they need. They will pay a higher interest rate than an Anglo who is less qualified. Empirical evidence. I sit on the Financial Services Committee. We've looked into these things. The empirical evidence exists. Still a desire, powerless. Now, some people would say, are you saying that there's a conspiracy? I don't think anybody had a grand meeting and decided, well, we'll just continue this caste system by making sure they remain powerless in society. I don't think that happened. I think that it has been inculcated into the culture. The 240 years of slavery, thereafter followed with black codes, convict leasing, Jim Crow laws, thereafter followed with lawful and legal segregation. Lawful and legal segregation until 1954, the Brown case. It hadn't been that long ago. In my lifetime, I suffered lawful, legal segregation. Thank God I have the power to forgive. Powerless. Intentionality. Powerless. In the culture, it is not going to be eradicated overnight. One court decision will not eliminate 240 years of slavery plus an additional great number of years of lawful segregation. It doesn't eliminate it. And many of the people who suffer from this affliction, they don't know it in the sense that they purposefully do these things, but they happen. 240 years of slavery, thereafter followed with lawful segregation. And now we still suffer as powerless people. I'm going to say more about powerless, but I want to just remind persons that we still are born black in America, still have the identifiable complexion. There are still people who expect us to be subservient, to be more respectful than others. I've seen it myself, wherein an Anglo person can say to a police officer that he or she or they happen to think is doing something inappropriate. Who do you think you are? Give me your badge number. I'm going to report you. The officer accepts it. African American says, who are you? Who do you think you are? It's unacceptable. There's a belief that you cannot challenge the system to the same extent as Anglos. All emanating from the permanent, identifiable, powerless, subservient caste. Now, let's give a supreme, superb example of being powerless. I think this example will speak in ways that many of us have not given consideration to. And I regret to have to bring this example to the attention of the House of Representatives, to the attention of the country, to the attention of the Senate. But here's the example. This building is the Russell Senate Office Building. The Russell Senate Office Building. This building is a symbol of national shame. A symbol of national shame. The Russell Senate Office Building. Taxpayer dollars built it. Taxpayer dollars maintain it. Every taxpayer in this country has a stake in the Russell Senate Office Building. And it's a symbol of national shame. I'm talking about racism in America now. How we learn to tolerate it. But remember this, those who tolerate racism perpetuate racism. Let's talk about the Russell Senate Office Building, named in honor of a self-proclaimed white supremacist. Self-proclaimed white supremacist. This is Brother Richard Russell, senator. I refer to every man as my brother. And if not my brother, according to the notable anthropologist, paleontologist L.S.B. Leakey, we're probably cousins. So we probably related in some way. But this is Mr. Richard Russell. Mr. Richard Russell is prominently displayed in this building. When you enter this building, you enter into a rotunda. This is where Mr. Richard Russell is prominently displayed, in the Russell Senate Office Building. You'll note at the top, we have styled this, we have captioned it, self-proclaimed white supremacists. This is Mr. Richard Russell, self-proclaimed white supremacists. This building is named in honor of Mr. Richard Russell, this man, the self-proclaimed white supremacist. He stands there today in the rotunda of the Richard Russell Office Building. Richard Russell. Now, why would I make an issue of this for you in talking about racism and enslavement? Well, here's why. Powerless. Remember, powerless. Powerless. This is the building. Powerless. We, people of African ancestry, are powerless to remove this man's statue and to remove his name from a building that we support. We are powerless. We can't get it done. The Senate knows that Richard Russell was a bigot and a racist. They probably see him more of a racist than as a bigot, but he was the person who fought anti-lynching legislation. He's the person who fought civil rights legislation. He's the person who co-authored the Southern Manifesto, and he is the person who stands in the rotunda all to himself in the Russell Senate Office Building. Yes, we've asked that his name be removed from the building and that his statue be removed. Just as the Senate has removed names from military bases, the Congress has, House and Senate. Senate can remove that name of Richard Russell. This is Richard Russell, standing in his place of grandeur. But there's more to be said about this. I would now like you to see a different view of the Russell statue, a different view. Your perch can sometimes influence what you see. I have shown you Mr. Russell up close. Now let's step back and take a look. Here is Mr. Russell, he's standing here. And by the way, I respect and I say Mr. Russell. There are people who would demean me for saying Mr. Russell. He was a former United States Senator. He was a bigot and a racist, but I still give him respect. So here's Mr. Russell. Now, let's put this here for just a moment. There's Mr. Russell. He's here. I hope the camera can pick him up. But here's what you cannot identify that I have to identify for you. Above Mr. Russell, in the Russell Senate Office Building, above Mr. Russell, in these various spaces along this area, in the Russell Senate Office Building, are news outlets. Major news outlets. CNN is there. MSNBC is there. Major news outlets. They occupy the space above Mr. Richard Russell. Who can deny that they are aware, that they are sharing space with a self-proclaimed white supremacist? Have they no shame? CNN, have you no shame? You fight against hate and you house yourself above Richard Russell? Have you no shame, MSNBC? Have you no shame? The man's name shouldn't be on the building, his statue shouldn't be in the building, and you ought not be housed above him. The Richard Russell office building with Senator Russell in all of his glory, above his head, notable news sources, reporting the news, not reporting that Richard Russell is right beneath them, the racists. Remember now, those who tolerate racism perpetuate racism. All of these news sources, I just mentioned two, Fox is there too, all of them, they're there. And if one of them that I have called is not there, you let me know. I don't go over there. I haven't been over there. I'm a one-person protest. I don't go in the building. I respect myself too much to go there. I have dignity. I have respect for myself. I'm a sinner, but I'm not that much of a sinner. So those who tolerate this perpetuate it, tolerate this statue being there, they perpetuate it. So I'm saying it, CNN is perpetuating racism. MSNBC, you're perpetuating racism. Fox, you're perpetuating racism. I'm saying it, and I know that I'm powerless to do anything to you about it. You can stay there as long as you desire. Never report it, and it becomes a non-issue. You can stay there, and the world will remain as it is. There'll just be one member of Congress who came to the floor of the House of Representatives and had the courage to call you out. I know you won't get any airtime on CNN or MSNBC or Fox. You can't challenge the news media and tell them where they're wrong and expect them to allow you to be heard. That just doesn't work that way in this country, probably in very few countries in the world. You can't do it. So I understand that. I understand that I'm powerless. But I also understand that I can take a stand. I also understand that I can point out to people that yes, you can challenge power. Yes, you can be that person who speaks truth to power. Yes, you can do it, but here's what's even more important than speaking truth to power, and that is speaking truth about power. You see, to speak truth to power, you simply say, power, we have a problem, and we need to solve it. But when you speak truth about power, you say, power, CNN, MSNBC, Fox, we have a problem, and you're part of it. They're part of the problem. And there are others up there with them, but you're part of the problem. Richard Russell, a self-proclaimed white supremacist, in a rotunda all to himself. I know of no other rotunda that has a single person in it, if there may be one. And there you are, housing yourselves above him. Now, if I'm wrong, let me know I'm wrong, and I'll come back to this very podium, and I will extend an apology. I will do it. That's what, when you're wrong, that's what you do. So I'll come back, and I will extend an apology. So I ask you, CNN, I ask you, MSNBC, I ask you, Fox, tell me I'm wrong and that you're not reporting from above Richard Russell. Richard Russell. I'm talking about racism in America. I'm talking about how those who tolerate it perpetuate it. And I'm going to now talk about solutions. There are many solutions. Please don't take this as all-inclusive, but this is necessary solution. Necessary solution to, as a matter of necessity, deal with how this has been inculcated into society such that these prominent news sources would tolerate this. There are some things that have to be done. They could be very beneficial in getting it done. But if they're tolerating this, I don't know to what extent we can count on them. But here's what we have to do. One of the things that we have to do is acknowledge the conscience agenda. Let me remove Mr. Russell for just a moment. He still maintains his place of honor in the Senate, but not here, not while I'm talking. And now we have to acknowledge this conscience agenda, our moral imperative. Here's what we have to do. We have to acknowledge slavery, the horrors of it, but also set aside a day. And by the way, I'm not asking for a holiday with people being paid and off from work. I don't want that. I don't think that we should have that for something as important as this. I don't want it to become something where people are going to have a mattress sale and talk about how you can get a great discount. Slavery Remembrance Day discount. Come on in and get your mattress. I don't want that. I just want people to understand that August 20th annually ought to be Slavery Remembrance Day. And I thank God that at least one prominent person has acknowledged it, and there are others that I'll mention very briefly, but this one, perhaps I'll reverse the order and let's do it this way. Mr. Steny Hoyer helped me to get legislation through the House recognizing Slavery Remembrance Day. Mr. Hoyer, I thank you. I'll never let history write you out. Thank you for what you did. Slavery Remembrance Day is important. We have Juneteenth, yes. Juneteenth is about celebrating freedom. When General Gordon Granger came into Galveston, Texas, and read General Order Number 3. That's worthy of celebrating. But this is about commemoration, not celebration. This is about commemorating those lives that suffered for some 240 years to make America great. 240 years of suffering, born into it in a caste system. Born into it, babies were slaves. Enslaved people is a more appropriate way to say it. Babies were enslaved human beings, grew up to become enslaved adolescents, went on to become enslaved adults, and thereafter died as enslaved human beings, lives devoted to making America great. No emolument accorded them. No recompense has been accorded them. No consideration other than they had the necessities to remain alive so that they could continue to be enslaved persons who could produce a work product. So we should honor this day. I'm proud of Senator Elizabeth Warren, who has helped to get this done, and she's working on the Senate to get the resolution through the Senate. The same Senate, by the way, same Senate that won't remove Richard Russell's name from the Russell Senate Office building. Same Senate that won't remove his statue from the rotunda that he happens to enjoy all to himself. But we have to have Slavery Remembrance Day. We should honor these economic foundational mothers and fathers on whose sacrifice America has become the great nation that it is. Built the Capitol. Yes, these folk, their hands helped to construct the very Capitol that we have here, helped to construct the White House, built the roads and the bridges, planted the seeds, harvested the crops, fed the nation. Yet, they're not properly recognized. In fact, this Congress did something that demeaned them. Here's what the Congress did, 1956. The Congress of the United States of America, the country I love, land of the free and home of the brave. The Congress of the United States of America awarded congressional gold medals to the enslavers. Congressional gold medals to Confederate soldiers. Nothing to the people whose hands helped build the Capitol. Nothing to them, but to the enslavers, the persons who fought to maintain slavery. Remember, it was to be a permanent, we had to go to war. Thank God for Abraham Lincoln, had to go to war to deal with slavery. People died. What a tragedy it was. But that's what it took to eliminate slavery in this country. So we gave a congressional gold medal to the Confederates. Nothing to the persons who were enslaved. Well, we can remedy that. Remember now, I'm talking about things that we need to do to change the mindset that we have. And we need, I think this Congress should, award a congressional gold medal to the enslaved. I mean, that seems so easy to comprehend, but yet so hard for this Congress to do. To just acknowledge that these folk who suffered for 240 years, they ought to be acknowledged for what they did too, for what they did here, for what they did with the White House, for what they did for this country. A congressional gold medal for the enslaved. There's a resolution pending for such a thing to be done. But remember, powerless. Powerless. And we are shown to be powerless when something as simple as this can't be done. When something as simple as having a Slavery Remembrance Day where the Congress, meaning the House and the Senate and the President, acknowledges it. We have a Pearl Harbor remembrance. We have a 9/11 remembrance. We have a Holocaust remembrance, meaning the President, the House and the Senate recognizes Holocaust remembrance. We don't have such a thing for the people who are the economic foundational mothers and fathers of this country. No slavery remembrance. Don't have it. That's because we are still powerless. We have some power. Yes, we are senators and we are in Congress and we've had a president and there's a vice president. But we are still shown that we cannot demand justice and get justice. There are people who would say, you're not asking for it properly. You have to be subservient. Be servile. And maybe you can get it then. We can't demand it and get it. I demand it. We ought to have Slavery Remembrance Day acknowledged by the House, the Senate, and the presidency, as well as a congressional gold medal accorded the enslaved. And then, I've talked about it, we need to remove Richard Russell's name from the Russell Senate Office building. I won't go into any great details in explaining that. I've gone through it clearly. And there's legislation for atonement that's pending. I won't go through that. But I do want to go to the last item on my agenda, which is number 5, and so that I may govern myself accordingly. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, if I may please, can you tell me how much time I have left?
The gentleman has 26 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to talk now about the thing that I think will help not only with slavery remembrance, but also will help us with other issues that have not been resolved. And that is the establishment of a Department of Reconciliation. We have not reconciled, Mr. Speaker. We have not reconciled. We have not. There are chasms that exist that we cannot see, but that we can experience. We need to span the chasms that divide us. And to do so, we need to have a methodology by which it can be accomplished. And to have that methodology, we have to have a means in place. This would be the means by which the methodology could be enforced, put into motion, so that we can get reconciliation. Reconciliation. There ought to be in this country what we could not do after the war because President Johnson was more interested in the antebellum aspect of the war. He would have gone back if he could have, but he could only go so far. But he did limit forward movement. So we didn't get reconciliation. But we need a Department of Reconciliation with a Secretary of Reconciliation. A person who wakes up every morning with the mission of helping us to reconcile the differences in a very positive way, I might add, the differences that separate us, the chasms that we failed to span over the centuries. And remember now, slavery lasted for more than 2 centuries. It wasn't a 20-year event. That's why some of the aspects of the powerlessness are still inculcated into our society. But continuing here, so we need this Department of Reconciliation with a secretary and undersecretaries of reconciliation to deal with all of the invidious discrimination that has not been resolved. There are issues related to other persons that have not been resolved. One example would be the indigenous Americans, the first Americans. Their issues have not been resolved. These are the folk who suffered the Trail of Tears. These are the folk who suffered wars against them and made them the villains, defending their land, and they're the villains. We need to resolve this. The Department of Reconciliation would help us do this. It won't be done in a month, a week, a year or two, a decade. It's going to take time, but it's not going to be done without some structure. It's not going to be done with just a passage of time. It won't happen. Dr. King reminded us that it's not the passage of time that makes change. These are not his exact words, but rather what you do with time as it passes. What do you do with the time? If you don't make good use of it, the change won't take place. So we need this Department of Reconciliation, and we need a Secretary of Reconciliation, and we need undersecretaries of reconciliation, and we need a budget. I have proposed that the budget for this department be indexed, tied to, if you will, indexed, tied to the Defense Department's budget. Why the Defense Department's budget? Because we will always fund the Defense Department. And I think that we should have a budget that's indexed, tied to it. The money wouldn't come out of the Defense Department's budget. There would be money that would be the equivalent of some percentage, say 10% of what's in the Defense Department for a Department of Reconciliation, so that we can at some point, span the chasms that divide, separate, and prevent us from having the level of unity within our country that we richly deserve, given the great documents, the great founding documents of the country. All persons created equal, endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Certain documents, the pledge, liberty and justice for all. So we need to do these things. And I am committed to getting these things done. I'm committed to Slavery Remembrance Day. I am committed. I stand alone sometimes with this commitment. It's an idea that I brought to this Congress, and I'm going to stay with it. Yes, I'm the progenitor of Slavery Remembrance Day. I'm going to stay with it. I'm not letting it go. The Congressional Gold Medal for the Enslaved, I will not let it go. Removing Mr. Russell's name, I will not let it go. Establishing a Department of Reconciliation, I won't let it go. The question is, will others find it within their hearts, their spirits, to take a similar stance? I pray that they will. I close with this, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we persons of African ancestry have suffered, our ancestors have, and are still suffering from the indignation and humiliation associated with slavery and segregation. We're still suffering from it. We're still suffering from racism. There are people who would say, forget the racism. I'm not going to forget it, just as I would not want my Jewish brothers and sisters to forget the Holocaust. Don't forget the Holocaust. And I won't forget slavery. We're still suffering. And we are suffering because of what I indicated initially, why we were brought to this country. When I say we, I'm talking about my foreparents, why they were brought to this country. They were brought here to be. They were brought here to be a permanent, remember, 240 years of slavery is evidence of it, centuries, identifiable. They wanted people of color because they could spot them easily. Powerless. No power, not recognized. The law recognizes no rights for you as they relate to persons who were Anglo. Subservient, always servile, always humble, always ready to serve, pleading with the master, give me something that I may do for you, master. Caste. Difference between caste and class. Remember, class is a socioeconomic condition. Caste is usually hereditary. You're born into it, you live it, you die. We're still suffering from this original reason that enslaved persons were brought to this country. But I believe that we can bend the arc of the moral universe toward justice for African Americans and all other persons who suffer from invidious discrimination. I believe it. I believe we can achieve it. I just know that we have to work hard to get it done. Mr. Speaker, I thank you for the time. I am proud to have stood here, and I proudly move forward with the conscious agenda that I have called to the attention of our country. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.